Growing up as a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog has been quite the roller coaster of an experience, and I'm not talking about the inconsistent quality of the games or the constant changes the franchise has seen. When I say I never truly understand Sonic, I'm referring to the perception of his games. Take a game like Sonic Adventure, once praised for its imagination, brilliant theming, groundbreaking game elements, and solid controls, soon buried under the cavalcade of Sonic was never good rhetoric, seen in the late 2000s and early 2010s. By now, that kind of blanket hate has been mostly fleshed out, which is good in my mind. There's a lot of people who will never click with a Sonic game, and that's fine, but this franchise is beloved by so many people that we definitely have to take a more empathetic approach to what makes these games fun. Sure, you can jump out of a scripted loop or spin dash up a wall and laugh at how silly the game seems in comparison to more modern, polished games, but what always made Sonic fun to me was the sheer amount of fun movement options, beautiful set pieces, and imaginative stage themes. Not to mention you can almost always count on Sonic games to have amazing music. These are the qualities that led so many people like myself to fall in love with the franchise, and when reviewing these games, it feels important to at least acknowledge those elements, even if the game isn't for you. You guys already know how much I love SA1, 2, and Heroes, even if those games may have problems that I find to be a hamper on the overall package. One thing I never expected, however, was to see people calling games like Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06 their favorites. I mean, I always knew there would be some, but the sheer amount of newfound appreciation for these games was quite the shock to me. I'll come out and say that before this year I had never played Shadow the Hedgehog. Well, to be more specific, I played Westopolis as a kid, hated how the game looked and controlled, and never played it again until now. Considering how much I love Heroes, people were begging me to give Shadow another chance and insisted the game was an overhated gem. That's how I feel about Heroes, so it wouldn't be fair for me not to extend an olive branch to this game as well. I will say up front, this entire review is going to be my honest reaction to completing the game in full 2 times. Yes, that means 2 full playthroughs of all 10 stories, the last story, and of course, reaching and playing Expert Mode. Twice. Well, technically I had to play it 3 times, but we'll get there later. If you love this game, I would absolutely love to know what draws you to it, and if this game makes your blood boil, I'd love to hear more about your experiences as well. I'll admit, the new avalanche of love I've seen for this game in recent years really piqued my curiosity, so is this game as bad as it was once criticized? Is it actually a misunderstood gem? Or could it be somewhere in between? Let's take a very close look at Shadow the Hedgehog. Coming fresh off the heels of the Adventure duology, many were disappointed the next installment wasn't called Sonic Adventure 3. This was such a big deal that fans have still been pondering the creation of SA3 for decades now. Some make the argument that Heroes was technically Adventure 3, as the structure and gameplay was similar enough to the first 2 titles. Others would claim that 06 is actually Adventure 3 because it's strikingly similar to SA1 in gameplay structure and shares storytelling elements seen in SA2. And if we're being honest, 06 is definitely an adventure-style game, so it begs the question if it's more about wanting similar gameplay styles, or if it's just the title itself that matters. Of course, the main reason people won't compare 06 to the first 2 adventure games is because of the poor quality of the overall game and the fundamental mistreatment of the elements that made those games so enjoyable, but we'll get there in the next video. There were 2 huge questions lingering after the release of Sonic Heroes. Would the next game be just as lighthearted and colorful? And what the hell is the deal with Shadow? Yeah, Sonic Heroes brought Shadow back from the dead, from his heroic sacrifice in SA2. Since Heroes didn't have much of a story to discuss, all that was really accomplished was raising the question if Shadow was the real ultimate life form or a clone created by Eggman. Shadow has amnesia, and instead of Rouge or anyone else explaining his past to him, I guess they wanted us to get an entire game dedicated to answering those questions. I think it was a great idea to make a full game explaining the mysterious return of Shadow and tying up the loose ends after Heroes, but the first reveal of this game seemed like a bad parody, with Sega showing off their accomplishments of previous titles interrupted by a barrage of bullet holes and revealing footage of the new game. Before everyone gets mad at me for poking fun of the idea of Shadow being a gun-wielding badass, put your presentism at the door and put yourselves in the shoes of someone who saw this back in 2005. It's not the fact that guns were involved, since Eggman held a gun to Amy's head in SA2. It's not the dark themes, because we saw Station Square flood and saw the moon get blown in half. It's the tone itself. Shadow going from a cocky anti-hero with hatred planted inside of him to this seemingly cute 4-foot hedgehog character carrying pistols, machine guns, driving motorcycles, and killing human soldiers. Hell, even literally killing Sonic. It's not these things in and of themselves that made this seem so outlandish, it's the visual storytelling. The reason Shadow was so cool in SA2 was because he was just as skilled as Sonic, had interesting new abilities with Chaos Emeralds, and had a clear motivation. This version of Shadow constantly tries to prove to the audience that he's cool by, well, cocking an MP5, sure, and constantly swearing and walking away from explosions. I think the best way to describe why this was laughed at isn't because it's dark, but because it comes off as trying too hard to be something that it isn't. If this game were a mature spin-off that was rated teen or mature, maybe the tone it went for could have been pulled off better, but as it stands, it's wearing the costume of a mature game that has to confine itself to an E10 rating. Kids didn't like it because it was too dark compared to the Sonic games they played before, and teens didn't like it because they could just go play Call of Duty instead. The reveal served to alienate the fanbase, something that would only get worse as the series moved forward. Old-school Sonic fans saw this as a bad attempt to reach a new audience, and newer audiences saw it as a childish rendition of something much darker that they could play instead. And look, you don't have to agree with these statements, but these were very real complaints from people at the time, including myself. I loved Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, and God of War growing up, and loved Sonic. So, when I first picked up Shadow, I hated the intro, played Westopolis, thought it felt like Asta Control, looked dull, boring, and like it didn't know what it wanted to be, then never picked it back up again. Now that I'm an adult, I'm gonna go back in and see what I've been missing, but we all have to take a step back here and acknowledge what the general perception of the game was at the time if we're gonna talk about how views can change. Now that Sonic has been just about everywhere and done just about everything, I think we can all look back nowadays and love some of these games for what they are. As long as the game is fun and the developers put care and effort into it, then I'm a happy camper. Rant's over, let's talk about the development of Shadow the Hedgehog. So, I mentioned the development of Heroes was rather trying on poor old Iizuka. His co-designer fell ill and had to leave midway through the development, so Iizuka was tasked with finishing all the stages on his own. He suffered from insomnia and lost over 20 pounds finishing the game, so I'd assume he needed a break after Heroes. Also, credit where it's due, man. Eggfleet is one of the best Sonic levels in existence, and it was made by one sleep-deprived dude. No matter what Iizuka does from here on, he will always have my respect for that. However, my guy cannot give a straight answer about why Shadow returned. He's been on record saying that Shadow was always meant to return after SA2, but then also on record saying it was supposed to be a one-and-done appearance for the character, and he was only brought back because of the overwhelming reaction to him. Believe it or not, a poll was created after Sonic Heroes to ask fans which character they would want to be the lead role in a new game. They included Tails, Knuckles, Eggman, and Shadow. I would have liked to see an Eggman game, but it was obvious Shadow would win. Now, if they put Big the Cat on that poll, we could be living in a very different timeline.
Something's biting!
Turns out the inspiration for the game's tone came from movies like Underworld and Terminator. Yeah, I can see it if I kind of squint my brain. It seems to me the gameplay was inspired by games like Ratchet & Clank, where it's a combination of high-speed platforming and gunplay. Iizuka wanted to challenge himself by combining the style of the mech shooter segments in SA1 and 2 with Sonic's high-speed gameplay style. Shadow seemed like the perfect vessel for this style because Iizuka never wanted to give Sonic a gun. Yeah, he's definitely more of a sword kind of guy. The good news for this game is it seems like Iizuka didn't suffer as hard making this one. Hell, the game actually had 4 level designers, so I can see why. This game features branching story paths depending on how good, neutral, or evil Shadow is during the stages, something that they apparently wanted to do in Adventure 2 but didn't have the time for. Can we consider this the first time that a Rush game is actually a good thing for the series? I mentioned that the game is given an E10 rating, but funny thing is, it was originally given T for teen by the ESRB after the trailer was revealed. As luck would have it, the ESRB created the E10 rating during this game's development. Sega was able to just squeeze into that rating by omitting a few elements, one being a gun soldier shot to death by a black armed soldier in the intro, another being removing blood from the gun soldiers and replacing the aliens' blood with green sludge. They also toned down the swearing in this game. Wait, there was gonna be more swearing? Sega's decision to fit this rating probably didn't help the mature themes the game was going for, but to be fair, I don't know if that's the biggest issue with the story. While the budget for these games isn't publicly available, I think it's safe to say this game didn't have as high of a budget as some of the other titles, since the asset reuse is a bit crazy. You thought Frontiers was bad, Shadow and Company are ripped straight from Heroes, as are many of the sound effects and textures. Some sounds are also from SA1 and 2, while certain chunks of levels are literally ripped from Final Rush and Final Chase. These aren't necessarily gripes about the game, but just something I couldn't help noticing during my playthroughs. Here's a quick list of all the shared assets I found, but feel free to comment below if I missed anything. The tornado sound in Glyphic Canyon is the Windy Valley tornado from SA1. The slot machine sound on the egg dealer is from Casino Park and Heroes. The sound of the doors in Lost Impact is from Heroes Egg Fleet, or Egg Emperor closing itself.
Those were more. Yes,
Many gameplay mechanics like pulleys, springs, rings, question bubbles, and rail grinding are all from Heroes.
There's rope! Doesn't matter. Let's take it.
Those pulsating blobs are some kind of...
Back on the team.
The final haunt switch sound is the same as the self-destruct switches in Final Fortress.
Shadow, the humans have summoned.
Hitting shielded enemies is the sound from the Egg Emperor.
It's not over yet.
The Arc level's not only taking elements from SA2, but also keeping full sections of the level design. And like I said, the character models are unchanged from Heroes, besides Rouge, who gets a new outfit in this game. None of these things are a problem, really, and are to be expected in many cases. No need to make a new sound effect for elements that were already in the previous games, but keeping the shiny character models from Heroes really makes them stick out in this game with its darker tone, in my opinion. Okay, enough stalling. Let's get into the actual game, shall we? Let's start with the story, which is quite a lot to cover, so if you want to skip straight to the gameplay, just click ahead to this timestamp. In Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow was shown to be created as the ultimate life form, something the Guardian Units of Nations, or GUN, initially wanted Eggman's grandfather Gerald to create as a tool for their military. Gerald originally didn't want any part in this, but in learning his granddaughter Maria was terminally ill with NIDS, he realized this immortal life form could potentially cure her disease. The ultimate life form was scrapped after the first attempt, with it becoming too large and unruly, so he began working on his second version, dubbed Project Shadow. Near the end of SA2, we learned that Gunn didn't like what they saw with Project Shadow and raided the Ark to destroy it, and in the process, shot Maria dead. Shadow managed to escape, but the incident was pinned on Gerald by Gunn, and he was sent to prison, where he'd be forced to continue working on scientific projects for them. After learning about Maria's fate, Gerald went mad and programmed the space colony Ark to collide with Earth when all 7 emeralds were used to power it. He also planted hatred for humanity in Shadow, meaning that Shadow was conditioned to desire the destruction of mankind as revenge for Maria. The entire game covers Shadow's character arc from misled villain to enlightened hero, where in the final moments we see Shadow sacrificing his life to save the planet. A beautiful character moment and a highlight of the series for sure, but Shadow's popularity was just too strong for Sega to keep him dead. It was just 2 years later that Shadow was revived in Sonic Heroes, where he's seen to have amnesia, and the cliffhanger of the game was whether this was the actual Shadow or an android created by Eggman. Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, serves to answer these questions, and it's no wonder so many people were excited for this to come out. That is, until the trailer was met with pretty negative reception. This game's story starts with Shadow standing in a field, riddled with questions about his past, and only being able to vividly recall one thing: Maria's death. He doesn't remember who she was to him, how she died, or really anything other than the image itself. It's right then that an alien invasion takes place in the city. Shadow's initially reluctant to involve himself in the situation until the leader of the alien species, Black Doom, appears and tells Shadow of the promised time. Black Doom tells Shadow that if he gathers the 7 emeralds and brings them to him, all about his past will be revealed. This leads to a branching story where the player decides who Shadow believes. You can follow Black Doom's orders, take the side of Sonic and the humans, or pave your own way. Regardless, the main plot of Shadow the Hedgehog is gathering all 7 emeralds to uncover Shadow's past. As I mentioned, this game has a total of 23 stages, but only 6 levels in each campaign. When looking at the level structure, it seems like there should only be 5 endings, but that's where you see these 10 little dots. These are end-run bosses that determine the final story path you take. Yes, that means you have to complete each of the 5 story runs twice just to pick a different side at the end. Think of the level chart as a sort of morality scale. The lower your path, the closer you are to being a hero. The higher, the closer you are to pure evil. The middle is just the neutral path, where Shadow takes neither hero or evil side and just collects the emeralds to uncover his past. Couple problems here. Nearly every ending is Shadow using the emeralds to uncover his past anyways. It just depends on who he follows to collect them and who he betrays along the way. Each ending showcases a new, lowercase t truth about Shadow's past and who he is. The neutral path shows him learning that he actually is an android clone created by Eggman.
Dr. Eggman.
Which was the question raised in Heroes and left to be answered in this game. However, if you finish the neutral path completing a hero mission, he defeats Eggman and decides to rule the Empire with an android army. If you complete the neutral path with an evil mission, he defeats Eggman and decides to rule the Empire with an android army, but with slightly different dialogue. This tracks with each of the 5 final stages, where you can either choose to stick with your desired path objective or completely switch sides at the last moment. But it almost never makes a real difference on the story and serves as some of the worst padding I've ever seen in a video game. For example, you can complete every evil objective to get to the true evil ending, where Black Doom convinces Shadow he was created by Gerald Robotnik to destroy Earth and wipe out the human race. This shows Shadow defeating Sonic and planning to use the emeralds for the destruction of Earth, basically retreading over his original intentions in SA2. But if you change course at the last minute and finish the evil path with a hero objective, Shadow defeats Black Doom and decides to rule the universe himself. A lot of the time when you switch sides at the end of a story or take the semi-hero or evil paths, Shadow will just explain his strange alliances and betrayals with, "Nobody tells me what to do."
I am Shadow the Hedgehog. I, and only I, know what is best. No one can tell me what to do.
The fact that there are 10 endings, some of which have little to no differences between each other, just makes this story such a disjointed mess. It feels like they were forced to come up with justifications for some of these story paths as opposed to actually writing real character motivations for Shadow. It basically boils down to a few things. Either Shadow's an android or the real Shadow. From there, he has the choice to serve Black Doom, serve Gunn, or serve himself. Some of the hero pathways are in service of Gunn, which we all just have to pretend they weren't literally responsible for killing Maria now? Hell, the Gunn commander in this game blames Shadow for Maria's death. When he was a child, him and Maria were besties, which you'd think he would have been made aware of her friendship with Shadow at some point and that Shadow wasn't actually evil. He witnessed the creation of Shadow the Hedgehog during his childhood and wet his pants because of how frightening this cute little guy was. When Gunn raided the Ark and attempted to wipe out Shadow, they killed Maria in the process. So this dude not only blames Shadow instead of Gunn, but literally fucking becomes the commander of the same group that shot Maria. Look, I really don't care what the explanation could be that would somehow make this grudge make sense, because the game never actually presents any of this information in a way that isn't completely contradictory to the story in SA2. Sure, we all know Gunn lies and does cover-ups when things go wrong, like how they framed Gerald when the Ark was raided, but this story suggests that the Gunn commander witnessed these events as a child and somehow still thinks this is Shadow's fault. Maybe it's just the fact that Shadow's existence was the reason Gunn raided the Ark to begin with, but even then, wouldn't he hate Gunn and Shadow at the same time? If the military killed my best friend during a raid, I couldn't fathom working for them, let alone reaching the highest rank. This story's just a mess either way you slice it, and what really sucks is, with some fine-tuning, some of this story would be a fantastic addition to Shadow's backstory and his connections to Gunn and the Ark. But instead, I keep feeling SA2's story rolling over in its grave every time they try to add these new characters or motivations. The story paths that have the most solid endings are the pure evil and hero endings, since there's no shoehorned explanation for Shadow changing his mind or being indecisive. The true hero ending works best for me, as at the end of the day, Shadow became a hero in SA2 and helped save the day at the end of Heroes. Shadow wipes out the Black Arms and works with Sonic to defeat Black Doom and stop him from taking over the planet. Despite what Gunn did to Maria, they are the planet's only major defense against the alien invasion, so Shadow working with them to protect humanity is completely aligned with her wishes for him. Look, don't get me wrong, the idea that you can choose your own story in this game is a neat one. Letting the player decide how Shadow would uncover his past and who he would likely create alliances with is a really fun idea. Personally, though, I find this story to be a complete waste of time because I already viewed Shadow's arc in SA2 as canon, and retreading the same discoveries to become a hero is pointless when SA2 covered it so well, while becoming a renegade or a villain feels undercooked and unmotivated. Black Doom using Gunn's arc raid to convince Shadow to join his side is a neat touch, but it doesn't feel like they expanded on these ideas in clever or sometimes even coherent ways. So much of this game's story just feels confusing or pointless, especially when beating all 10 endings uncovers the final story and finishes the game off with one true canon. The last story shows Black Doom telling Shadow he was created from his own DNA. Gerald made a deal with Black Doom. In exchange for help in creating Shadow the Hedgehog, Gerald would give Black Doom the Chaos Emeralds to power the Black Comet. At this point, Black Doom uses Chaos Control to warp the comet to Earth, using it to harvest energy from the humans. Black Doom releases some sort of paralyzing gas that traps the hero so nobody can stop him. Luckily, Shadow being part Black Arms thanks to Doom's DNA can break free from the paralysis. This has Shadow traveling through one last level on the Black Comet before confronting Black Doom, who transforms into Devil Doom, the next god monster of the week. Shadow uses the Chaos Emeralds to transform into Super Shadow and enter the final showdown with Devil Doom, where if you somehow don't beat him after 8 minutes, Eggman finally decides to spill the tea that Shadow is the real Ultimate Lifeform and not an android clone. So, the only major cliffhanger left from Heroes gets answered in a mid-fight voice line from Eggman that most won't even hear because this fight can be finished in 5 to 6 minutes on a first playthrough anyway. God, this game baffles me. Defeating Devil Doom, Shadow uses Chaos Control to send the Black Comet back into orbit, where the Eclipse Cannon destroys it for good. Shadow ends this story by discarding a picture of Maria and Gerald, claiming he's leaving his past behind him. Well, good, I guess. If the road to this ending wasn't so mismanaged, maybe I'd find this ending a bit more touching. I'm sorry guys, there's just no defending this story as it's presented. I know there's countless video essays tying this story together in an easy-to-digest little bow, or using the poor English localization as a scapegoat for some of the story's more confusing elements, but there's nothing in my mind that will somehow convince me that this story is a misunderstood gem. It was bad in 2005, and it's bad now. Shadow the Hedgehog is arguably the most important secondary character in the series, and SA2 did a great job telling his story. If you're gonna bring him back from the dead, you have to do a better job than this. This game's story single-handedly ruined Shadow for a lot of people, and I can't blame them. 06 no doubt did a better job with his character than this game did, but after that, we'd have to wait almost 20 years to see Shadow represented properly again. An icon almost as big as Sonic, reduced to a brooding, edgy stereotype that showed little to no resemblance of the cocky anti-hero we once knew. As someone who loves to defend these early games as much as I possibly can, this story belongs in the time capsule of 2005. But maybe the gameplay fares better than the story. That's what we're all here for anyways, so let's not waste any more time. Shadow the Hedgehog's gameplay is pretty unique, maintaining his high-speed gameplay from Adventure 2 and Heroes, but this time around there's a heavy emphasis on combat. I know Heroes would sometimes have sections blocked off by groups of enemies, but those sections were pretty sparse compared to this game. In Heroes, the combat was centered around speed and complex mechanics, where nearly every enemy could be taken down in mere seconds if you learn the game's mechanics inside and out. With Shadow, there is no power character to rely on, so how does Shadow tackle the swarms of enemies throughout his levels? Well, yeah, he uses guns. I already mentioned at the beginning that Shadow wielding guns doesn't seem far-fetched to me, but admittedly seeing this tiny little guy carrying pistols and machine guns can be a bit jarring. I won't be the guy who spends 30 minutes complaining that gunplay doesn't belong in a Sonic game, as the adventure titles already had shooting segments and most weren't fazed by it. I also won't be the guy who glazes the gunplay as if it's the greatest thing since Halo 2. Shadow stages feature a plethora of different guns to grab, mostly either found in crates or picked up after killing enemies. Some guns are just basic pistols that you can pick up from gun agents, while others can range from machine guns to laser guns, rocket launchers, and yes, even swords. The quality of these guns range greatly depending on the type, and while rocket launchers tend to do a great deal of damage, I find myself leaning toward the machine guns and regular revolvers. The auto-aim is decent on these guns and makes it much easier to kill enemies quickly while on the move, instead of having to stop and manually aim to kill specific targets like with some of the bigger guns. There wasn't a single enemy in the game that didn't go down quickly by just mashing the action button with one of the auto-aim guns, so it did kinda make the game's more elusive weapons feel slightly pointless. Some of these weapons are pretty fun, like the laser guns you pick up from Black Arm soldiers that have a massive range, or the Billy Hatcher egg gun that sucks up any small object or enemy in sight and even grants you extra lives after a certain number are absorbed. And some weapons are downright hilarious to use, like these ridiculously long guns that clip through the floor, or basically any stick, pole, or torch which can be swung like a sword. I'll come out and say it's almost never advised to pick up a sword in this game unless it's your only option. Every weapon comes with limited ammo, which can be refilled when you collect the same weapons again. Swords also have limited usage, and most break after 5 to 10 slices. The swords tend to have pretty bad range and do very little damage, so just stick to guns if you can. Two attacks I would never recommend in this game are the ground combat, like short-range kicks and punches, and the homing attack. My god, what did they do to the homing attack? I completely understand making the homing attack weaker to put more emphasis on the weapons, but sometimes the homing attack is the only way you can kill certain enemies, and god is it bad. It does so little damage that you have to bonk some enemies upwards of 8 times to kill them, and if there's no crates around, you'll have to do this multiple times per stage just to pick up a gun. The homing attack has one improvement over the previous games that I'm glad was included, which is that it has a much larger range. You can homing attack enemies that you could only dream of reaching in the last few titles, and it can even lock onto enemies that are well above you. This is a much needed improvement, especially for a game with a lot of homing attack chains over bottomless pits, something the series kinda went nuts with for the next few years. That's where my compliments end for this move, however. It somehow feels slower, yet more unwieldy compared to Heroes. In Heroes, you had upward and horizontal momentum after hitting enemies, giving you enough control to either aim back at the same enemy if it hadn't died yet, or safely plan your next move. In Shadow, you barely have any horizontal control after attacking, meaning that if you need to homing attack the same enemy 7 times to kill it, you have very little control over positioning yourself properly. Every time you hit an enemy, Shadow moves slightly farther forward, so after the third attack or so, you have to slam the control stick back, reposition yourself forward, and attack again within an extremely small time frame, or you'll be air dashing straight off a cliff. That's another move that feels butchered from the previous games. Adventures 1, 2, and Heroes had a consistent air dash that accelerated you quickly while also giving you the distance and speed to reposition yourself after a jump to make it to farther platforms. In Shadow, the same philosophy is here, but the dash arc and especially the mid-air turning is so unintuitive and slippery that I found myself dying more times than not after performing it. One huge improvement this game made to the air dash is the ability to stop on a dime after using it when the control stick is left in a neutral position. This one added mechanic saved my life when platforming more times than I can count, and if this was in Heroes, I bet a lot of people wouldn't find the game nearly as slippery. But that seems to be the trend with Shadow's controls compared to the previous games. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. They add new elements to a lot of Shadow's core moveset that are great improvements, but it's always hindered by multiple glaring flaws that weren't present before. Take the triangle jump, which was a neat addition in Heroes that allowed speed characters, besides Amy, to quickly traverse tight corridors over lower paths or bottomless pits. The mechanic was simple, but it functioned well and felt quick and fun to use. In Shadow, they added the ability to run in short bursts between jumps, giving the player a lot more control over when and where they jump as to avoid obstacles and collect goodies. However, this triangle jump is slow and takes all the quick, snappy action out of the mechanic. It's also extremely finicky, where when you reach the end of the wall, pressing the jump button doesn't always automatically release you from the wall like it did in Heroes, but instead will sometimes launch you off the side of the platform because the triangle jump animation didn't end yet. That means you have to manually exit the mechanic at certain points by pressing the X button, which only works if you're close enough to the edge to land on it. These are all examples of great ideas with poor execution. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. This applies to the entirety of the game's controls. Shadow somehow manages to feel more slow and sluggish than he did in Heroes, while simultaneously feeling even more slippery and unwieldy. How did they accomplish this? Heroes was plenty slippery as it was, but at least Sonic had a complex kit of mechanics to save himself most of the time, or you could at least swap to the flight character to slow down or save yourself. The control in this game is just not good. Some elements surprise me with how well they work, but most of the time I'm finding myself jumping constantly as to not fly off the side of the level or to avoid getting hit by the millions of non-stop attacks and obstacles. Yeah, this game really went nuts with making you play defense. No matter where you are or what you're doing, 90% of the time you're constantly being shot out of the air, hit by off-screen bullets or missiles, smacked by piss-poor enemy placement, or just hit by random obstacles in the level. The good news is they added a mechanic that makes this a million times easier. Yeah, you probably know where I'm going with this. Shadow the Hedgehog ditches the Sonic staple of losing all your rings when you take damage. Now, the amount of rings you lose depends on the strength of the attack. This means that if you have a decent amount of rings, you need to take multiple hits before you're down to 0 and actually need to fear for your life. That is a fantastic addition to a combat-heavy game. I love this. So, what's the 2 steps back? Well, the first, as I mentioned, is the constant barrage of attacks, most of which are untelegraphed or completely off-screen that make you hear this sound way too often. Damn it. The second is you can't jump out of a hit stun. Why did they remove this mechanic for Shadow? This is arguably the game where this move was needed the most, and they took it away from us. In the previous games, getting hit in midair will stun you, but you have a time window where you can jump out of the stun and save yourself from falling off a level. In this game, you get shot out of the air all the damn time, and you can't even jump out of it to save yourself? What upsets me about these changes is they clearly rip most of Shadow's moveset directly from Sonic Heroes, so while I'm glad they added new features that fix many of the control issues found in that game, they went and tweaked the controls in ways that made it feel worse, and in some cases just removed mechanics that could have really been useful here. As a whole, the game controls well enough to keep me alive for the most part, and doesn't feel broken or glitchy in ways that 06 can, but that's about all I can give it. Gone is the snappy, quick timing of the movement from the adventure games, and gone is the back-to-back controller inputs that carry the consistent flow from Heroes. These aspects are present in some of the stages, but thanks to the sluggish movement and unruly nature of these mechanics, it never feels as smooth as it once was. Now, we have a game that feels like an imitation of those control schemes, but just doesn't quite hit the mark. Like I said, perfectly functional, but not very fun to me. Shadow also has 2 new moves in this game, thanks to the power of the Chaos Emerald. Killing a certain number of black arms fills your Chaos Control meter, and killing gun agents and robots will fill your Chaos Blast meter. Think of it as having 2 Team Blast meters that are filled by completing either hero or dark objectives. Chaos Control is a glorified teleport feature that shows Shadow dashing through a chunk of the level. This move is surprisingly implemented well, considering how broken it could have been. You can't exit the move until you're above solid ground, which means if you start it before a rail or water section, you can skip a hell of a lot more of the level than you would normally. The only jank with this move is that sometimes the level geometry hasn't quite loaded in yet when you reach the end, but the game never fully drops you until the collision's back, and I've never once died or been left in a bad position by this move. The unfortunate thing is, this move is really only useful when the mission objective is to reach the goal ring. For most of the missions in this game, you're asked to kill a certain number of enemies or interact with a certain number of objects throughout the level, so this move would more often than not skip some of those sections and you'd have to loop back around to complete them. This move is very useful, however, when taking the neutral path or completing expert mode, but we'll get there later. Chaos Blast definitely feels closer to a Team Blast, where Shadow releases a burst of energy that damages every on-screen enemy. Thankfully, you can perform it multiple times before the meter drains, and the meter refills when more gun enemies are destroyed. What is useful, however, is when your meter's full, you're given invincibility and unlimited ammo until it's drained. This is much more useful than actually performing the blast, as you can just demolish enemies with rapid fire and not have to worry about taking any damage. This is especially useful in boss fights, as you're usually given very limited ammo, and this trick can take most of them down in seconds. For the most part, these additions are great, despite their limitations, and I find the game a lot more fun and fluid when you learn how to use them well. Found in many of Shadow's stages are vehicles, some optional and some mandatory. I would never recommend using them if you don't have to. They're a lot slower than his ground speed, have poor aim, and control like ass most of the time. Like, the hero mission in Lethal Highway is to take down this black arm ship. You're given the option to hop on a motorcycle to chase it down, which is a really fun idea, but it's just not worth it. It's much quicker to chase it on foot, as the level's split up by tons of platforming and combat sections anyway. This mission's actually really funny because the ship takes a lot of damage to take down. You'll usually be at the very end of the level before getting enough hits in to actually destroy it, but the funny thing is, if you die, the ship keeps the damage it's already taken. Since a lot of these A ranks are based on time, you could just die repeatedly in one section and take the ship down with very little time spent in the stage, giving you an easy A rank. I guess this is a good time to talk about the rank system, so here goes. This game features an end-level performance rank just like the previous two games, where the amount of points you receive from the stage and your time bonus add up to give you a letter grade. In both Adventure 2 and Heroes, the balance wasn't getting a good time bonus while also racking up enemy combos and tricks for extra points. Those two games had a great balance between speed and style for their A ranks. In Shadow, most of the ranks are solely based on time. I mean, you do gain and lose points if you complete hero objectives while completing dark missions and vice versa, but for the most part, you can die multiple times, lose all your rings, avoid killing enemies, and still easily manage an A rank just by speedrunning the level. I can see how some would prefer this system over the complexity of SA2 and Heroes ranking systems, but I certainly don't. This means the game puts much less emphasis on style or even combat, in stages where the combat is a major focus. I think with some fine-tuning, the rank system could be a lot better, but as it stands, it feels like 90% of the A ranks can be achieved by simply beating the stage quickly. What really sets it back, though, is that you have different ranks for each mission objective in every level. Yes, that's 72 A ranks in a game that only has 22 distinct levels.
Oh joy!
Okay, I know what some of y'all are thinking. Well, isn't that better than Adventure 2, where each mission had 5 separate A ranks to get? Or in Heroes, where all 4 teams went through the same levels and had 2 A ranks in each one? And yeah, fair point, but the mission objectives, level lengths, and monotonous nature of this game make these ranks feel like so much more of a chore to me. Imagine 8 out of the 10 paths in this game as playing Team Chaotix, where every mission has you killing every enemy or flipping every switch, but each level is upwards of 12 minutes long, some even taking 30 minutes on a first playthrough. Then tell me that A-ranking every one of these isn't a chore. I think that's my biggest issue with Shadow the Hedgehog, the objectives. Shadow's objectives for hero or dark missions almost never feel more fun than simply getting to the goal ring. Most missions are to kill every black arm soldier or every gun soldier in the level. When it's not that, it's activating all the switches, healing every gun agent, destroying every bomb, lighting every torch, I know how much you guys like that in Heroes, or destroying a specific target throughout the level. To be fair, some of these missions just require you to make it to the end of the stage anyway, like helping Vector find the computer room. And some can be pretty fun, like racing Sonic to the end of Space Gadget, a neat little callback to the space colony in SA2. But even this mission couldn't go unscathed, because if you're wanting to complete the neutral path, you have to sit at the goal ring and wait for Sonic to beat you to it before the neutral mission unlocks, as both missions require you to reach the goal. And yeah, while there are some fun missions in each pathway, there's also the ones that make me question my choice to be a Sonic fan. I'm looking at you, Lost Impact. The infamous Lost Impact stage is part of Shadow's memory, joining Maria as the artificial chaos swarm the Ark. Remember how fun these guys were in Adventure 2? Well, you don't know pain until you complete the hero mission in Lost Impact. This mission requires you to find and kill all 35 artificial chaos enemies within the stage. If that weren't bad enough, these enemies have enormous health bars and spawn multiple targets, so killing them with guns wastes a lot of ammo, and homing attacking them is damn near masochistic. And if that weren't bad enough, you also have to ride these turrets throughout the majority of the level, and some of these enemies are hiding behind doors and pillars, meaning it's very likely new players will have to repeat these sections multiple times to find and kill them all. The turret moves very slowly, but you can speed it up by holding the jump button. I'd sure like to do that, but if I do, then I'll probably miss one of the artificial chaos or not have enough time to kill them, since you have to aim this turret manually. And if that weren't bad enough, this level is huge! I want to issue a formal apology to Death Chamber.
I hate Aquatic Mine and Death Chamber.
Because the sheer amount of maze-like sections with little to no differences to tell them apart makes this level, so far, one of the worst levels I've ever played in the series. My first playthrough here took me 40 minutes. That's Eggman Land amounts of time spent in a stage that makes watching paint dry sound like a 5-star holiday. When this level isn't frustrating me with its repetitive maze-like structure, it's boring me to death with its monotonous objectives and slow-moving platforms. These elevators do not need to be this slow. This honestly is a major problem in a huge chunk of this game's levels, waiting on and riding slow-moving platforms in sections that never needed them to begin with. These levels are long enough without any padding, just give me a spring or a dash pad and call it a day. With how slippery Shadow's controls are, the only real challenge these platforms add is fighting with the camera and crossing your fingers that Shadow safely lands on them. This is especially bad when some of these sections shoot you into the air, making the player think that the game will drop them down safely, only for the game to say, nah, you gotta hold forward, but don't go too far or you'll overshoot the platform. Probably the worst example of this in the game is in Digital Circuit on Expert Mode, where the game forces you to perform a nearly frame-perfect air dash to reach this pixel-sized platform and immediately release the control stick so you don't slide off. And look, if it sounds like I'm being overly negative about this game, maybe that's because my experience of this game was mostly negative. The things I enjoyed about my playthroughs were heavily overshadowed by things I'm either indifferent to, bored to death by, or absolutely piss me off. With most Sonic games, even the ones I don't enjoy, there are elements that stick out to me and make me want to go back and replay them. In Sonic 06, I loathe the way Sonic feels to control, but his stages are mostly vibrant, pretty well designed, and have sections I find fun to play. With Sonic Forces, I find myself bored to death by the weak level design, but never frustrated with the game's level length or mechanics. Shadow serves to both bore and frustrate me at the same time, with little to no redeeming qualities I look for in a Sonic game, or really any video game for that matter. When I look at Shadow as a Sonic game, which it definitely is, I find it too dull and bland to match the level design and aesthetics from the other games. When I look at Shadow as a standalone combat platformer, I find it to be incredibly mediocre compared to games like Ratchet & Clank. In my opinion, there's no perspective in which I can look at this game and call it good. And the biggest sin it commits is not being fun. Remember, these are just my personal opinions, and everyone's entitled to their own. If you disagree, I'm more than happy to hear why you find this game fun and what elements you enjoy about it. But I'd be lying to your face if I said I would really ever replay this game over the adventure titles, Unleashed, Colors, Gens, or hell, even Forces. I'm sure it probably gets tiring hearing the same opinions said over and over again about a game this old, especially if you disagree, but at the end of the day, I still feel like this was a dark age for the franchise. A very small one, mind you, because I love Heroes and Unleashed, but Shadow the Hedgehog, when it isn't frustrating me with its slippery controls, tedious combat, level design, and marathon length, is putting me to sleep with its slow-moving platforms, repetitive missions, and bland level themes. So, unfortunately, just like the story, the gameplay here is a swing and a miss. So, I guess let's move on to the art style. Shadow the Hedgehog ditches the bright and varied stage themes from the previous titles in favor of a much darker tone and aesthetic. This only makes sense, as the game is intended to be a much darker story and setting to set it apart from the lighthearted story of Heroes. Most of Shadow's stages consist of a primarily gray and purple color scheme. The city levels are mostly concrete roads and buildings, making them look pretty dull compared to the previous city levels. The Black Comet levels are dark purple, with little to no variation, making them look very samey. What bothers me is, I think these levels could have looked really cool if they just had a little more visual variety. Maybe the Black Comet could have more alien technology that was visually distinct to make the level feel like you were experiencing a completely foreign society. As it is, all the purple and black just removes any life this location could have to me. There are some levels with pretty neat aesthetics, like Digital Circuit with these colorful towers and pathways, and Circus Park with Eggman's usual whimsical charm. I really love the set piece where Shadow climbs to the top of the circus tent and grinds the tightrope to escape. Neat little things like this that go a long way in making the stage feel grounded and fleshed out. Also, some of these levels are straight up ripped from previous games, like the Ark levels reuse assets from Adventure 2 with little to no graphical updates. But even at its best, this game just isn't very visually interesting to me. Maybe Heroes spoiled us with a beautiful art style and amazing stage themes, but something about the color scheme in this game just feels washed out and dull by comparison. I feel like if this game wanted to go in a darker direction, it could have benefited more from a gothic design, similar to Devil May Cry, or it could have taken the Halo route since I feel like that's where the game drew some inspiration. I think it also could just be that this game was released at the tail end of the 6th gen, but feels barely above a Dreamcast title in terms of graphics. The models ripped straight from Heroes don't look right in these muted levels. Where I will compliment the art style, however, is the in-game animation. Not talking about the cutscenes really, because those still don't look great, but the in-game animations for Shadow make his movements look a lot smoother than they did in Heroes. The squash and stretch on his jump looks really nice, his skating animation looks pretty smooth, and basically every movement is visually a step up from the previous games. Shadow isn't a bad-looking game by any means, but definitely not very interesting to look at outside of a few neat-looking levels. I mentioned the cutscenes don't look amazing either, but I'm chalking that up to bad-looking character designs and not really the animation. The Heroes models never really looked that good in cutscenes to begin with, but mixed with this game's art style and interesting dialogue, the cutscenes are quite the sight to behold. Okay, so we need to talk about the dialogue in these cutscenes. This game is notorious for having awful English localization and just some really confusing lines. Of course, there's the famous ones like,
"We're on our way to the Ark, so I guess that means we're going too."
And of course,
You've gotta be kidding me, guys. This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
the line is meant to read as Shadow's fine with how easy it was to get the emerald, not that he's fine with taking candy from babies. At least I hope that's not the intention, but the fact that lines like this are already in a game chock full of
Where's that damn 4th Chaos Emerald? Disgusting black creatures. Get out of my sight. You're going straight to hell.
means that nobody cares whether the translation was bad or not. The tone of the game was already a laughingstock before this line came up. I know it's easy as an adult to look at a game like this and think the lines are cringy or cheesy, and that's one thing, but even as a kid I found this to be ridiculous. I mentioned that I picked the game up as a child and immediately put it back down, but that didn't stop me from going on YouTube and watching every single one of these cutscenes a couple years later. I found myself laughing every time Shadow tried to act tough and started cussing, and it's because this game fundamentally fails to get one thing right about Shadow. He doesn't act tough, he is tough. I mean, this is something even Sonic 06 got right. Show, don't tell is a rule this game's writers never used. When I saw his character going from a hate-filled villain seeking vengeance for Maria's death to a loyal friend sacrificing himself to save the world, it pains me to see him try his hardest to vocalize just how tough and cool he is in a game where his motivation for taking each moral pathway seems undercooked and undefined. It comes across as a middle schooler trying really hard to impress his older friends, and less like an ultimate life form being cocky about his powers. Look, I don't want to shit on this game, and I'm sure that's hard to believe considering I spent most of the video doing that, but I went into this game with an open mind and wanted so badly to find it an underrated gem, or at least overhated. But man, the critics were mostly right about this one. Even at my most charitable, I found this game breaking me down in each playthrough to the point where I couldn't find a defense for it. The gameplay isn't fun at all to me. The story bothers me on so many levels, the visuals are bland, and God, let's get this over with. The music. Before saying anything else, I want to make it clear that this is a Sonic game, and Sonic games have great music. Even the weakest Sonic soundtracks tend to still be good, and Shadow's no exception. But what's this I'm hearing about Shadow having an amazing OST? Who said it? Was it you, James? James, we need to talk. The main themes, I Am All of Me by Crush 40 and especially All Hail Shadow by Magnify, are some absolute bangers, and that shouldn't be a surprise. I love this version of All Hail Shadow more than any sane person should, but if I'm being honest, the majority of this soundtrack doesn't even compare to the previous games. Most of the level music is good, sometimes it's fantastic, but a lot of the time it's either a bit dull or just doesn't at all fit the level it's placed in. I honestly couldn't tell you most of these level tracks by name because most of them didn't stick out to me. For the ones that did stick out to me, it's either because they're straight gas, like Digital Circuit, Lava Shelter, and Lethal Highway, or because they were so far from what I was expecting, like Lost Impact and Gun Fortress. Both great tracks, but so calm for endgame levels. Especially Lost Impact, because I've never had so many crash outs while listening to such a calming track. I think the Lost Impact music fits the idea of the level super well, very somber and sad as you're reliving Shadow's memories with Maria, but damn if it doesn't feel so criminal putting a beautiful song like that in the worst level in the game. Again, for a video game soundtrack, it's still great, but for a Sonic soundtrack, it's nowhere near the highs of the previous titles. Crush 40 also composed an ending theme called Never Turn Back, which is also really good. In general, though, I got a lot of heat for saying this game's soundtrack didn't wow me. I usually never have a hard time finding background music for these reviews, as the previous games had so many gems with a huge variety of moods that I was never stumped on what song to use next. Shadow's soundtrack really seems to have only 3 tones: sad, angry, and wacky. Kinda like my emotions while playing this game. If you're in the middle of unsubbing and writing a lengthy comment after hearing this take, go ahead and type the word asparagus at the end. I want to know if you made it this far. Well, it seems like every element of this game, from the story to the gameplay to the presentation and even the soundtrack, are disappointing to me. I went into this game expecting it to be wrongfully hated, like Heroes, but actually just ended up becoming more frustrated because it seems like so many people are defending this one nowadays, and while I'm happy people find enjoyment in these games now, I can just feel the angry mob approaching when I honestly say, Shadow's one of my least favorite games in the franchise. I'm probably gonna regret asking this question, but are the bosses any good at least? Shadow the Hedgehog has a total of 8 bosses, including the final boss. You'll usually encounter each of these main bosses multiple times during your 10 playthroughs, or hell, you could end up like me and fight Black Bull twice in a single playthrough. Which bosses you fight depends solely on your route through the stages, meaning when you clear hero objectives, you'll be fighting aliens like Black Bull or even Black Doom himself. Black Bull is a pretty standard affair, showing how most bosses in this game are handled. The only decent way to damage bosses is with guns, but most arenas have very limited weapons to pick up. This is where the infinite ammo trick I mentioned earlier comes in handy. Try not to waste your ammo too soon and wait until one of your chaos meters is full, then demolish them in mere seconds. In neutral and some hero paths, you'll be fighting Eggman's mechs as well, both of which are hilarious. The Egg Breaker is a pretty simple fight, taken down quickly by grabbing guns from the egg pawns that spawn in continuously, and trying to avoid his many attacks. By many, I mean 2.
You know what they say, the more the merrier. know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier.
Wow, it brings a tear to my eye to see this game call back to Sonic Adventure.
Get a load of this. Get a load of this.
Some pathways have you duking it out with Gun, where one of their soldiers mans a wide variety of mechs. These are clearly an homage to the mini-bosses in SA2, even remixing the same track. You have to homing attack these mechs to make them drop their missile launchers, and this is where that homing attack range really shows itself off. When it comes to final bosses in each run, there's only 3. That means that out of 10 endings, there are only 3 bosses, 4 of which are the Egg Dealer, and 3 go to Black Doom and Sonic and Diabolon each. They seriously couldn't come up with at least one more boss fight? The Egg Dealer has got to be the dumbest mech Eggman's ever created, and I love it. Think of it as King Boo in Mario Sunshine, where you spin a slot machine which determines if and how you can attack the boss. If you homing attack the slot machine buttons on his mech, Eggman's attacks will backfire on him, so he programmed his own machine to damage itself if someone else spun the slot machine. See what I mean? Eggman likes losing. It's the chase that he enjoys, not ruling the world. There are 3 attacks that damage him. He can drop bombs on himself, shoot missiles at himself, or Shadow Fever.
No, not Shadow Fever!
So Eggman built a slot machine mech that grants Shadow Chaos Blast. What if Eggman spun in that combination by himself? Would Eggman get Shadow Fever? Thankfully, with how dumb this fight is, it's the easiest of the final fights, so at least it isn't frustrating. I cannot say the same about Sonic and Diabolon.
Take this.
Yeah, if you think I'm doing something wrong here, no. That's actually how you have to fight this thing. Why couldn't we just battle Sonic by himself? All this boss is fighting a gun mech while using Sonic as a stepping stool to reach him. This thing has a constant protective barrier that only goes down once you homing attack Sonic. For the first phase, you have to attack Sonic, get high enough in the air to hit this thing, and then homing attack him 3 or 4 times before the barrier goes back up. Do not waste your ammo early in this fight. These arenas give you only a couple guns, so just be patient while homing attacking him until your Chaos Blast meter fills, then spam him with your infinite ammo. Same goes for Black Doom, who moves around the arena and sends a couple attacks your way. You can damage him almost anytime he's visible, so this one isn't as bad. Just be sure not to use Chaos Control right before he teleports, or it'll go completely to waste. And then there's the true final boss of this game. Devil Doom is the final form of Black Doom in this game, and takes cues from SA2 and Heroes, having the fight take place in space. Devil Doom has 2 faces to attack, which will switch sides constantly as you try to do damage. You lose rings fast in this boss fight, so try your best to grab rings on your way to him every time he teleports. Most final fights in these early 3D games aren't amazing, but this one feels especially rushed and broken, with certain obstacles shoving Shadow down so he can't attack or grab rings. Now, I could be wrong here, but there doesn't seem to be a way to move up and down, so this is really inconvenient when it happens to you, and you just have to wait for the game to slowly bring you back up to your normal position. It's not a horrible fight, but it's no perfect Chaos or Metal Overlord in terms of presentation and spectacle. Yeah, the bosses in this game are just what you'd expect. Some are pathetically silly and easy, and some are needlessly tedious and overstay their welcome. My favorite fight is Black Doom, since it feels the closest to a standard boss fight with no annoying gimmicks, and the worst is obviously Sonic and Diabolon with just how repetitive and slow it is. As always, before ending the video, there's a lot of extras to cover in this game, as well as my wonderful experience with Expert Mode, so let's dive in. The early 3D Sonic games were always chock full of extra content and game modes, and Shadow's no exception. Featured throughout the stages are gold keys. But wait, these don't take you to some piss-poor special stages, they actually unlock these doors, usually found about halfway through the level. These doors usually contain a bunch of extra lives and great weapons, or open up massive shortcuts in the levels to reward the player for mastering the game. My favorite example is in Cosmic Fall, where unlocking the door spawns in these light dash chains that let you skip huge chunks of this extremely slow platforming section. And yeah, the light dash is still horrifying to use in this game like it was in the previous games, but it's still fun to skip these sections when it works. Also found throughout the stages are these shadow boxes, which contain a plethora of stronger or more interesting weapons that can be unlocked throughout your playthroughs. Like I said, my favorite was the egg gun that sucks up small enemies and objects for extra lives, which was very useful for Expert Mode, considering in this game you don't get extra lives for collecting 100 rings anymore. Well, you kinda do, but it's different in Shadow. Instead of getting an extra life for every 100 rings you collect, you obtain the 1-ups from checkpoints when you pass them with over 100 rings. This means, with some skill, you can actually collect a lot of extra lives if you don't lose your rings between checkpoints. Unfortunately, this is Shadow the Hedgehog after all, and for most people, not taking damage in this game is only a pipe dream. I mentioned that this game has a total of 72 A ranks, so what do you get by unlocking them all? Well, in Sonic Heroes, collecting all emblems unlocks Super Hard Mode, a run of all 14 stages with no bosses, no ranks, harder layouts, and only one set of lives. Yep, that's exactly what they did in Shadow, but instead of 14 levels, it's 23. That's every stage throughout the game, plus the last story level. You start the run with 5 lives, and if you lose them all at any point, you start over again from Westopolis.
How goody!
For those who weren't there, I livestreamed my first playthrough of this game on the channel. I brilliantly decided it would be a fun idea to end the series with a drunk expert mode stream, where viewers could watch as I suffered live trying to complete expert mode for the first time, getting progressively more intoxicated and frustrated. I actually did manage to make it to the end without getting a game over, which took me a total of 4 hours. Of course, my dumbass thought it'd be fun to let chat donate to make me restart levels and lose lives. I finally got to the end of The Last Way, where I was forced to restart the level. It was fine, as I had a good amount of lives and I knew the run would be over soon anyway. Then, I got to the end and paused, because KKO Games was joining and he was being the absolute degen we know and love.
Yo, Imperial Lord, they never said these black creatures would be caked up.
Jesus Christ.
That's
This would be the worst mistake I ever made, as our good friend Nerdstorm made me restart the level again. Okay, that was dumb, but I can't complain. I'm 20 bucks richer and I only have to play the same level again and then it can be over. Well, that's when this happened. Like I said, to restart the entire run, $100. That's minimum. How, close they are to each other.
Damn.
What an absolute legend. My guy Nerdstorm killed 2 birds with 1 stone, helping me climb out of the depths of broke boy despair and also making my life a living hell for the next 4 hours. This stream nearly lasted 9 hours, and by the end, I think I was more Hedgehog than man. I mentioned I replayed the game in full again to record footage and better understand the game for this review, so when I said I had to beat expert mode 3 times, that's what I meant. At the end of the day, is Shadow the Hedgehog one of the worst games of all time? Not even close. There are redeeming qualities about it, and it's not horrendously broken or unfinished like some other bad games. The unfortunate reality for me is, this game succeeds at boring and frustrating me with its repetitive nature, bleak stage themes and designs, and subpar controls, while also failing to excite me or motivate me to keep playing like most other Sonic games do. I can handle a broken or frustrating game, so long as the highs are there and it becomes more fun as you get accustomed to it. That's why I glaze Heroes and don't mind 06 so much. But when a game is both poorly made and has nothing interesting in it for me, it's gonna be doomed from the start. I really hoped to like this game, and started my journey with optimism and an open mind. And the game managed to beat me down to the point where I no longer had any motivation to pick it back up and finish it. For those who found a way to love this game, I'm really glad you did, as it's just one more game making you admire the franchise. For me, there's no hiding that Shadow the Hedgehog is one of the worst experiences I've ever had playing a Sonic game, and that's okay. This franchise has brought me so much joy, and so many exciting and fun games that it doesn't matter whether I love or hate this game. Shadow Gens revitalized the character and his gameplay in so many good ways that this game's existence has no bearing on the opinion of his character anyway. Shadow the Hedgehog may have been a bad time, but I'm as excited as ever to move forward and talk about the series I adore so Oh shit, the next game's 06, isn't it? Thank you guys so much for making it to the end, and a very special shout out to my amazing channel members. Huge thanks to Diane Diesel, Imperial Lord, and Proxera for becoming 2-month members. I'm really excited to grow this channel and keep making content for you guys, even if you love watching me suffer. And if you haven't by now, please support the channel by subscribing and checking out my other content. And remember, I'm not a Sonic channel. See you guys next time.